Hey, everybody. Welcome to another edition of the Shea Anything podcast. Doug Williams and Andy Martino with you today for a special Tuesday edition of the show. We didn't do one yesterday because Mets had a day game. It was the trade deadline. We'll get to that in a second. We'll be back with you on Thursday on our regular schedule with Keith. Since we last spoke is an interesting and complicated one in terms of
make a documentary on it.
Yeah, you could write a book on it. You may write a book on it one day. We spoke on Friday, so the Mets swept the doubleheader on Friday. Then they lost Saturday, then they got swept in the doubleheader on Sunday. Lost to the Marlins yesterday, so that's 2-4. The sale with Steve Cohen is close to being finalized. The Mets on Thursday sat out the game. I know we've spoke since then, but in protest of the racial injustice in our country. So that still looms so large. And Andy, before the show, you brought up the fact that it was just early last week that we were still having the COVID concerns and talking about the postponed games because of that. So the Mets have been through the ringer. They've been through a lot, and every 2020 consequence that can happen in a baseball season has happened in the past week, it feels like. So we're going to do the three batter rule of the three players the Mets acquired yesterday, but in the grand scheme, and again, I'm stealing Andy's point from before we came on the air, before we recorded. But in the grand scheme, this feels pretty inconsequential. But if you're listening to this Mets podcast, you care that they now have Todd Frazier, Robinson Chirinos, and Miguel Castro. You may care about one or two of those more than the other. I'm not sure where Todd Frazier is going to play. Robinson Chirinos is a former, everyday power hitting catcher who's in not much time this year, definitely struggled. And Miguel Castro is a former huge prospect with the Blue Jays who comes over from the Baltimore Orioles, throws hard, gives up some hard contact, but he's got a nasty sinker. I think he's a high upside guy. So, Andy, your take on the three of them, what they mean, what Brodie meant by acquiring them.
Well, I think what Brodie meant by acquiring them, whether he would consciously put it this way or not, I think the message that's sent to the team is the season's not totally over. So here are a few little pieces that'll help a little. You definitely need catching. It would be really great if Chirinos can tag a runner out when he's trying to score. That would be an upgrade for the Mets. They need bullpen help, obviously. They do not need Todd Frazier, but maybe they think he'll be fun or something to be around, whatever that is. Okay, here's your old buddy Todd. But it's not – the message is also that the team has not performed nearly well enough to justify a kind of all-in trade where you move prospects in order to try to win a championship this year. And it could have shaped up that way. Going into the season, the Mets had the talent and the expectations to compete for the National League pennant. And it's not over, but they've dramatically underperformed, obviously, so far at a 15-20 record as of this recording with less than a month to play. So that it just is what it is. And a front office always knows when they can feel, even beyond just the record at the time, when it's a year where there's a chance. And it's when you push your chips in the middle of the table. Like Sandy Alderson in year 5 of his tenure knew in 2015, this is the year that I trade Michael Fulmer, his best pitching prospect at the time, for Yoenis Cespedes and try to win a championship. And if Fulmer goes on to succeed with Detroit, as he did for a few years before injuries, you just deal with it because this is the year where you try to win. Brodie would, I'm sure, like it to be that year, but the team just hasn't been good enough. So, Doug, I guess that's a long way of saying it was a modest message to the players. Like, here's a little help, but you haven't earned the big help.
So Kevin Smith, who they traded to the Orioles for Castro, that in your mind wasn't a painful prospect to get rid of. That wasn't one of those trades that would send a message.
No, it's an interesting trade. Kevin Smith is a left-handed pitcher who I know very well through my deep scouting of the Mets system. Now, look, sometimes we become aware of these guys. We're aware of their names and we learn a little more about them when they become in the news like this. So I did a little digging on Smith yesterday, and it's like, look, he's better than a Corey Oswalt, maybe worse than an Anthony Kay. So he's probably a back-end starter at best. Probably not going to kill you moving forward, but a guy who can, if he turns into a guy who can take the ball at the back end of a rotation for a couple of years, that's value that you traded. That's kind of an interesting trade because Miguel Castro has a lot of upside without the results being there. So it's like a little bit of, I guess the trade's Brodie light. There's a little bit of a gamble there. Like, which one of these guys is going to turn out better? The high ceiling guy or the more solid guy? We'll find out. Ultimately, not that high stakes. And none of these trades are all that high stakes. I guess that's the point.
Yeah, I was wondering yesterday if he deep down wanted to make a huge splash. That's just kind of been his DNA as a GM. And not to say I was surprised that he didn't, but knowing that Steve Cohen's coming in, knowing that Brodie's future is in doubt, it's murky, and he obviously knows that. Nobody knows it better than him. So for him not to make a move that he thinks would significantly increase their chance at a playoff berth or a World Series run is interesting. I mean, maybe there wasn't anybody out there for him to really like help his team that much, or there wasn't.
He could have traded Ahmed Rosario and another top guy, I'm sipping off the top of my head, for Mike Clevenger or something. I mean, there's things that could have been done, and that's the mode he was in for about a year and a half. But Doug, I don't know. I might think of it a different way too, that Brodie, if he wants to prove himself to another owner or to the industry at large as a capable general manager, he may need to show that he's not just the stereotype all-in guy, that he's not one note. Like he, I'm sure, would make a case for himself that I can be aggressive and I can be restrained. It depends on what the situation calls for. So he doesn't want to have the reputation to Steve Cohen or whoever else in the game as somebody who is just going to trade the farm no matter what. Because if you're buying a baseball team, you want a guy running it who's going to give you some sustained success. You notice that Brodie's messaging is always win now and win in the future. Now, that's just a phrase. It has to be backed by action. But he's cognizant of wanting to not just be known as the aggressive guy.
Yeah, and that's a really good point. And I think he's made, you include the Stroman acquisition in there that obviously didn't end up working, but he's made a couple moves now that he uses that phrase to justify. You know, this is a move that helps us win now and win in the future. Not a rental GM by any means so far in his tenure. Right. But I will say, Andy, that if he acquired somebody that was that much of a difference maker for 2020 and the Mets win the World Series, it doesn't matter what his reputation as a GM is. I mean, maybe it does, but the Mets won the World Series for the first time since 1986, and he was the general manager. He put the team together. So it wouldn't be about like, hey, Anthony Kaye's the fourth starter for the Blue Jays. Yeah. And look at all these prospects you traded the Indians for Mike Clevenger. Yeah. It would have significantly helped his job security.
But I would say yes, Brodie's reputation would be fine if he won if the Mets won the World Series this year, but my bank account would be fine if I won the lottery tomorrow. Look at the Mets. This is not, it's just, you have to be honest and smart about where you're at. And I think that's what owners ultimately tend to look for in their top baseball ops executive is, can you have a clear-eyed, objective, clinical look at where your roster you have and figure out a way to thread a needle of trying to contend now and contend in the future. So that's, yes, winning cures everything, but the Mets are 15-20, right?
And when Todd Frazier hits the walk-off home run in Game 7 of the World Series, Andy, we'll look back at this conversation and say, this was totally unnecessary. We didn't have to have this conversation because Brodie didn't go for it, but he made the move that led to the World Series title.
It could happen. Look, a lot of weird things are happening this year. I'm not going to bet $1 million that the Mets won't win the World Series, but I don't see it. Let's put it that way.
As of right now, I don't either. So another since we last spoke thing. So Edwin Diaz, this would be in the book, I think, about the past week or 10 days or 2 weeks. So Seth Lugo gets put in the rotation kind of hastily, and it's a conversation we had all year. Then suddenly the Mets do it at a time where a lot of weeks have gone by where they could have done it. So not only does Seth Lugo become a starting pitcher, but Edwin Diaz becomes like their high leverage closer, reliever, everything. And he has not pitched well in that circumstance. I tend to think that he has not been put in a position to succeed. I could see the counterpoint to that was like, this was supposed to be your ace reliever, screw positions to succeed. He should get outs no matter what position he's put in. But I'm curious, did the Mets at least entertain trade offers for him on deadline day, or is his value too low that it makes absolutely no sense to trade him now?
The way I heard it was that teams called trying to buy low on him, and the Mets weren't interested in moving him at that rate, let's say.
So what do you think? I mean, we've had multiple conversations about him this season. What do you make? Like the storyline thing, Andy, we talked about the pitch to Ozuna and how, if that pitch was 1 inch to the left, the storylines change. And you and I push back a lot on those storylines, right? But now that he's back in the high leverage situations and he's struggling again, at what point does this become the reputation of the player and the reputation of the pitcher?
I think we're pretty much there. I think that year 2 being messy, it was something that couldn't really happen, and it's happened. And so I think we're pretty close to saying Edwin Diaz needs to go somewhere else. Can't hack it here in a significant situation. If the Mets are a team with championship aspirations, as they are this year, next year, you're going to put Edwin Diaz in the 9th inning of a World Series game. That's where this ultimately goes. That's what you acquired him for. No. So it's probably time. I guess probably the ideal scenario is to try to get him to boost his value a bit over the next couple of weeks and see if you can move him in the offseason. But that's easier said than done, to move a player you gave up so much for. But, I mean, wouldn't you say that I don't want to speak for you, so I'll ask you if you agree. Now you've posed it to me, I've pretty much realized that I've decided that Edwin Diaz can't pitch in big spots for the New York Mets. Ever.
I would say I am there as well. But I would say that you've seen good things out of him in low leverage situations and as a mid to late inning reliever.
He's really good. He's incredibly good. That's the weird thing.
He's going to go somewhere else and he's going to succeed. He's going to be a Sonny Gray for the Yankees. I think that's, a decent comp. And I think he goes to the Reds and everything just kind of crystallizes for him. Maybe that'll happen with Edwin Diaz in a different market. But so now you're faced with the reality that Edwin Diaz did not get traded at the deadline. So he's going to be in the bullpen. So let's go back to the hypothetical that the Mets win the World Series. If we look into the future, Andy, that World Series team, is Seth Lugo the number 2 starter, or is he the closer for that run?
Oh, wow. This year?
Yes.
I think he has to be the number 2 starter. I don't think you have another option unless you want to start Ariel Jurado in game 2.
He's pitching tonight.
Is it Gerardo or Gerardo? I should know. Who else would start game 2? Who else would obviously you'd like Porcello to be in that conversation, but he's not been good. I mean, this is why this conversation will remain theoretical, I suppose. They don't have the rotation right now. They just don't. Losing Zach Wheeler was such a killer. Losing Noah Syndergaard, Marcus Stroman. At a certain point, another general manager of another team who I was talking to at the trade and reporting on the trade deadline yesterday made this point about their team, was saying at a certain point, there's nothing you can do. You're just holding a bad deck. You don't have enough good cards, and there's nothing you can do midseason. And that's what the Mets rotation is.
Yeah. I'm picturing the scene in Vegas Vacation where Chevy Chase keeps putting bubble gum in the dam and the water keeps coming out in other places.
Yeah. Hopefully our teams are in that situation in a way right now. It's just the air has gone out of the Yankees balloon and the Mets just because of all these injuries and underperformances and things that have gone wrong.
Yeah. I guess the Mets bullpen situation, I always go back to 2015. Mm-hmm. And at the time when like Ruben Tejada got hurt, mm-hmm. and you're like, that's a big blow. Uh-huh. Wilmer Flores can become their shortstop. At the time, I guess that felt okay. But looking back on it, it's like, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
First of all, losing Ruben Tejada was a big blow to a team that was on a World Series run. Second of all, Wilmer Flores was the shortstop on a World Series team. Travis d'Arnaud's behind the plate. Lucas Duda's at first. Teams with warts can make runs.
Sure. But that team had pitching. That team had Colon and Syndergaard coming out of the bullpen in the division series.
I know. And
Mets.
The Royals starting pitching was Little to none. It was okay, and their bullpen was strong. So there are different ways to go on runs.
Maybe, Doug, and just go with me here for a second, maybe that wasn't a strong World Series matchup.
Well, I thought the Royals were very good position player-wise and bullpen-wise. If you have 2 out of 3, it's usually a good thing. But we have gone on this kind of like roller coaster with the Mets bullpen so far this year. I mean, Diaz is good. I'm defending him. Then Diaz is bad again. Seth Lugo is good. Then he struggles. Now he's in the rotation. Dellin Betances was never himself. Now he's on the IL. Steven Matz was briefly a part of the bullpen. Now he's on the IL. Brad Brock had COVID. Jared Hughes is in the Mets bullpen and has been a guy for this team. Drew Smith has a nasty cutter, but in big circumstances, you don't want to use him. You want to use Hughes for the 7th straight
Apparently,
day.
even with a 5-run lead, you don't want to use him, weirdly enough.
So at times I've had optimism about the group, and Jeurys Familia is somewhere mixed into all of this. You know what I keep coming back to, Andy? When you have the bases loaded and nobody out or 1 out, which Justin Wilson or Hughes or whoever seems to be constantly creating these jams in the 7th, 8th, or 9th, you want a strike thrower to come into the game. You know who 3 relievers who are really not strike throwers in high leverage situations are? Dellin Betances, Edwin Diaz, and Jeurys Familia.
That's true.
All 3 of those guys have reputations to go 3-0 or 6 straight balls. Jeremy Hefner goes out to the mound. They're all kind of the same.
Yeah.
And
that's correct.
It's not good for, that's why Chase and Shreve and Jared Hughes are kind of journeyman relievers who are getting an opportunity for this team because Luis Rojas's hands are kind of tied. So again, back to the hypothetical, and this is the last kind of question I'll pose to you in terms of the deadline kind of line of questioning. Do you think that they can make a run? You said you wouldn't bet $1 million that they wouldn't win the World Series, but
yes, I think they can make a run. I think they can get hot. I think they're talented. I think there's some things working against them. I think the Phillies really got better at the deadline, fixing, I think, their one big hole, which is the bullpen. We'll see how that plays out. But yes, look, they're good. They're good. They're talented. They're not good right now, but they're talented. It's not impossible to imagine McNeil and Alonso hitting. That would be huge. Cano looks great. It's kind of getting buried in how poorly the team has played. So yeah, sure. In theory, they could make a run. It's not like they don't have the talent, but they don't. Now that we're talking this through today, they don't have the starting pitching to go deep in October if they were to make it. I mean, keep in mind, Doug, if they don't make the playoffs, that'll be one of the great disappointments in a very long time, if not in franchise history, given the fact that every team makes the playoffs this year but one. Is that the latest? 29 teams?
Yeah,
something like that.
It's a 2019 postseason.
So if the Mets are the one team that's out, that'd be bad.
Yeah, it's kind of a light shining on you.
But you know what I'm saying? Like, they're supposed to make it.
The Marlins are going to make the playoffs.
That would be cool. I'm sorry to the Mets fans that are listening, but given what they've dealt with this year and how bad it's been for them for so long, that would be cool if the Marlins got to play a playoff round. Cool,
but really kind of in the face of Mets fans who went into this season being like, look, anything could happen. We're built like a playoff team and everybody's a playoff team. So you'd think we'd be in. So I totally agree with you. I think they can make a run. And it's interesting, Andy, because last year, before the Mets went on their run, you were very skeptical. Like, you were like, I don't see this happening. It wasn't necessarily like you were like, sell, but it's just the window of competition is over. I remember that was the phrase that we kept talking about.
He dug himself too big a hole.
Right. So, all right, let's switch gears to our next topic and segment. And I like getting this out of you because I think we a lot of times get really interesting answers, and I think a lot of listeners are curious about the job. So in the absence of access, Andy, you're at Citi Field. You're trying to figure out what exactly is going on with the Mets. Who do you talk to? I guess you're at Camden Yards in a normal circumstance.
Camden Yards.
Who do you talk to today in the Mets clubhouse to write your story?
Well, overall, since we spoke, my answer is sort of an obvious one, but I cannot say anyone but Dom Smith because, and this is about sort of a point about the real problems with limited access, Zoom only access. PR is always on the Zoom. All the other reporters are on the Zoom. Dom there's a lot of threads to the things that he said about race, including one that I wrote a column about last week, which is when he said something that was very not kumbaya. When someone was like, do you want your teammates to kneel? And he was like, this is not for them. I don't care if they kneel. This is for the Black community. This is not for, I don't care about my teammates in this scenario. And I thought that was like, whoa, I want to have a 45-minute conversation with you about that. And then I had asked him after the game, with the non-game, after the game was called off in protest, what do you want to see from your white teammates the rest of the year going forward when this isn't in the headlines like it is today? And he gave a thoughtful answer saying, I just, for these conversations to continue. So I have a lot of follow-ups that I want to write on this big, extremely historic moment in the intersection of race and baseball that I can't talk about. I want to write a story about the many conservative sort of Fox News watching, Trump voting teammates that are still behind Dom or not behind Dom and how that dynamic is. I guarantee you that if you really looked under the hood of all that's going on, you'd find some stuff that was uncomfortable. Like they say, uncomfortable conversations. I want to know if he's on an island or if everyone's behind him on every point. So many things to talk about with this. So many important stories that will not be told. And that's a real shame. I'm going to try my best. I'm like making calls and stuff, but it's not the same.
Yeah. And you can, but you can't ask Dom like 7 straight questions for a column in a Zoom with every other writer.
Exactly.
Where it's clear that you're, writing a column and a long story about this and you want to really get personal with him. You can't do that while everyone's watching.
You can request a one-on-one. This is really getting into the weeds, but you can request a one-on-one, but that's through PR. And maybe PR would say like, we're going to sort of limit or tightly organize the stories that we want coming out of this. Whereas I could catch Dom in the dugout in a normal year and be like, hey, I'd like to make a case for just me and you for why I'd like to talk to you more about this. Then you can decide if you want to talk more. It's just, it's not doing this job remotely has its limitations.
Before you talk to Dom though, I get the sense you'd be with Howie Rose and Dave Lennon talking about how you think all games should be 7 innings.
Oh my God.
You'd be having this little powwow of people who think that baseball games should be short.
When I was watching the Mets yesterday afternoon and they went to a commercial break after the 7th inning and then they came back and they played a different inning, which was called 8. I was like, what the hell is this? This is way too long. Doug, oh my God. What is wrong with anybody that doesn't see it this way? Oh my God. It is so pleasurable, the pace, the tension. There's so many things about baseball. Traditionalists would just wake up and see it. There's so many things about the 9-inning game today that aren't what they think they love. The slog, the 3 true outcomes, the constant pitching changes, all the things that grind it to a halt and make it unwatchable, even to diehards at times, that are cured. So many, not all of these things, so many things are cured by the urgency of a 7-inning game. I truly do, on days where there are no double headers, miss that when it's the full 9. I really hard to go back to 9 after seeing 7.
Also, not that doubleheaders in a normal season are that common an occurrence, but you view the day of baseball so differently. Like right. You go into a doubleheader in a normal 9-inning game being like, oh my gosh, it's a long day of baseball and relievers, and knowing that a starter goes 4 or 5 and then, it's a couple innings of relievers and boom, game's over. Now, I've noticed that some of those games have been really long. It is not leading to like 2-hour games.
No, you got to there's a lot more that has to be done to fix this game.
Yeah.
But the 7-inning games is such an easy, instant fix to start. You need to do a lot of things. You need to ban shifts. You need to, this is a whole other conversation, but you need to create rules that make it easier to steal bases because fans like stolen bases. I would limit the amount of pickoff throws you can throw to make it easier for guys to steal bases. All kinds of things that you need to do to speed it up. And that's not because I want like the easy comeback is like, oh, you don't love the game you cover. It's like, no, I love it and I want it to survive. That's how much I love it. And everybody knows how boring it can be right now. How did we get talking? You brought this up.
No, I brought it up. The Mets have been playing a lot of games in very few days, and Mets fans have at least gotten a glimpse at what it could be like, 7-inning games. And I know that you've been passionate about it, so I wanted to give you
We've been talking about this for years.
You were ahead of the curve on this. You were the game should be 7 innings.
I'm sure we've talked about this on BNNY.
We have
several years ago, right?
Yeah.
Like when we talk about different rule changes and stuff. Don't you like it? Isn't it cool?
It's cool. I do like it. It is very abrupt to me. This is not a problem that I have with it. It's probably a me problem. But a lot of times I'll be watching the game and the game will end and I'll be shocked. That's just an adjustment in my head.
It's a strong feeling. It's not I'm bored or I'm asleep.
Well, Gary, Keith, and Ron, like in the booth, Gary will be like, again, this is a 7-inning game. And it's an important reminder because sometimes it just sneaks up on you. You're like, why is the closer in the game right now? Oh, right. It's just, and again, that's not a problem with it. I love baseball. It is my favorite sport. It's what I grew up playing. It's everything to me. And I love it the way it is, but I'm with you. I think it can get better. And I am not a traditionalist. So I am in favor of changes as long as they impact the game. If we're going to do 7-inning games, let's get them under 2 hours. Boy, wouldn't that be great?
Yeah, other things need to happen for sure. I completely agree with you there. It's not a fake cure-all in itself.
All right. Well, we got off topic, but this has been another edition of the Shea Anything podcast. An interesting week in the world of the Mets. We'll see where we'll be on Thursday when we talk to Keith. But Andy, good stuff as always. We will talk to you later this week. Just a reminder, subscribe, rate, and review us wherever you can. Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you listen to your podcast. We appreciate it. It helps us. And we hope you enjoy the show. Thanks for listening.